Think we can go ahead and get started. We have a pretty packed session today, so we'll continue to let people in as they join the waiting room. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to session 2 of our 2024 fall series. Today, we'll be going over professionalism and ethics, laws and regulations, and governance and organizational structure. With me today is Rick Nerad as well as Mary Lassard. We'll be presenting these 3 topics to you. Before we dive into that, though, just wanted to go over a few frequently asked questions that we've been getting, as well as a couple updates that should be helpful. So for this series, you will get 8 qualified ACHE credits that are self-reportable. So you can use these towards your advancement or recertification, depending upon where you're at. And so these are self-reportable again through my ACHE. What I would do is do them as one event. So basically, you create the self-reported event, you put the start date as the 21st, the end date as the 29th. Go ahead and put Cal Fall 2024 BOG Series, and then the 8 credits, and that should be enough for ACHE to review and approve those 8 credits. We also have included a link here. Rick was able to find this, which is great. It's an unofficial practice question guide. If you click on the link when we send out the slides, you'll be able to click on it. It'll take you to Amazon, and someone has created an unofficial practice question guide for the FACHE test. So this will be something that'll be helpful for you in your studies as well. And then just another reminder, at the end of the series after the 19th, we'll be sending out a survey monkey. Please, we encourage you to fill that out. We take your feedback very seriously. We want to make sure that this is a series that is helping prep you. So we'll remind you again throughout the series that this is coming. So with that, I will introduce Rick. Rick is one of Cal's founding board members. He was the treasurer when Cal was established. He is a professor at Cal State Chico, attorney at law, a unit leader for the CalMat state disaster, and has won numerous awards from Cal. I think there's a new one that we didn't put on this year, right, Rick, that you just got? Yeah, congratulations. He has been with the exam faculty here for 11 years, 10 years, 11 years now, just about. Yeah, he is one of our key members. So without further ado, I will let Rick take it over.
Thank you. So, excuse me, just to correct one thing, which is I wasn't the original treasurer, thank God. I took over later on, but I was on the original board. I'm going to talk about 2 issues, and then Mary's going to talk about the third one. So I'm going to start with professionalism ethics, and then I'll move from there into laws. Again, you can read this yourself, so I'm not going to read it to you, but the one thing I'm going to suggest is familiarize yourself with the ACHE Code of Ethics. You're not going to memorize it. There's no way to do that. It's too much stuff. But it's divided up into about 6 sections. And I would make sure you know what those sections are. And then when you do that, you can pretty much think about the big areas. So when you run into a question, you'll be able to relate it to it. You probably should take a look also at ACHE's various ethical statements that they have. Again, you're not going to memorize them, but have a sense of what they are. And finally, take a look, and you can find it online at the American Medical Association, American Nurses Association Code of Ethics, just to have a sense of what other professions do as well. So that I think is the best way to prepare for this one. So Ryan, could we move to we'll keep going there. Okay, so let's move to the first question. And as a reminder, I did not review these ahead of time with the hope that I'm going to be able to walk through them as if I found them on the test. All right, so I'm going to do my brain walk of saying, okay, what's going on inside my head as I try to look at this question as if I was taking it. The downside, of course, is that I'm liable to get something wrong. It happens, but remember that you don't need to get 100% on the test, right? So we don't know what the pass rate is. They don't tell us, but it's certainly not 100%. So, okay, primary task of an ethics committee. So obviously the main keywords there are ethics committee. That's going to be my focus. And it's the primary task. So I'm going to be thinking here about what ethics committees do and go through the choices, and I'm going to do these as true, false. So arbitrate conflicting decisions by caregivers and patients and immediate family. Well, no, they don't arbitrate. An arbitrator makes a decision. They might mediate, but they don't arbitrate. So that one's false. Develop the organization's ethics plan. That may be a task that they do, but I don't think it's their primary one. So I'm going to say that's probably false. Act as the surrogate body for regular decision makers. Well, surrogate is when you stand in place of someone else, and no, they do not. They are not a decision-making body. Right? Primary task is not to make decisions. No task is to make decisions by the ethics committee. So that one's false. So I've got false, 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 and I hope that D is true. Formulate policy and educate hospital personnel about healthcare ethics in general. Yeah, education and policy making are our tasks, right? So since the other three are false, I'm going to go with D and as the only one that looks true. And whether or not it's primary is arguable, but it certainly, those are two good tasks there. So let's go with D. And D was the answer. So again, you want to start by looking at the question, really make sure you know what it's asking for, look at where it's focusing, look for words like primary, look for words like never. It may be helpful sometimes with a particularly short one to read it backwards. Make sure you're getting those words, and then treat your four choices as if they're four true false ones. Let's go to the second question. The major purpose, so again, major is going to jump out at me, of a code of ethics for members of a healthcare executives association. Oh, a healthcare executive association. I'm not sure who they'd be talking about there, but I'm just going to say, what's the major purpose of a code of ethics? So I've got to know what a code of ethics is, of course, and then think about its purposes. So provide guidance to members in their own professional conduct. Yeah, that certainly is probably the purpose, the primary purpose. I think that's going to be true. Increase public understanding of the professional association. Not really, no. Provide a framework for disciplining members when necessary. You actually can be thrown out of ACHE for violating the code of ethics. I suspect it's pretty rare, and that's certainly not the primary purpose. That's a failure mode, so that's false. Provide a framework for annually evaluating professional performance. Well, when you get evaluated, maybe ethics is one of the things you're being evaluated on, but it's not the primary purpose of the code of ethics. It's not the whole framework there. So I think I've got true, false, false, false. So I'm going to go with A as the answer.
And it's A.
And it's A. All right, good. Let's go to number 3. The ethical precepts, that is organizational philosophy, oh God, philosophy, that guide an organization's activities are found in a variety of sources that are. So, okay, what I'm really looking for is something about the sources of the ethical philosophy. Where do I find an organization's philosophy? So, reflected in everyday action, yeah, probably true. Well, if the organization's doing it right, it makes sense. So I think A is true. The sole province, no. Sole means only. It means no one else is worried about it. That would be false on ethics. Part of the governing board's formal actions. Yes, some of it, but not all of it. So that's kind of like partially true. And written and unwritten. Hmm. Hmm. So I think A is true, but I also think D is true. So I'm gonna throw out B and C and just look more at those two. So look back at the question. I've got two true ones here. So I'm going to look back at the question and see where it's pointing to. Ethical precepts that guide in organizations, a variety of sources. So are the sources reflected in everyday action? The ethics are, the ethical precepts are, but now that I look at it again, I don't think the sources are. So I think even though I think A is correct in some ways, I think D is a better answer. So I'm going to go with D, uncomfortably, but I'm going to go with D.
It's D.
It is, I feel better. I could have made a good argument for A, but when you're not sure between two answers, go back and reread the question and see if it points you somewhere. So that helped me on this one. Let's go to number 4. Which of the following conditions must be met for human subjects to be used in a medical research program? Okay, so I'm going to focus here, human subjects in medical research. Okay, so what's required there? No suitable animal model exists for use instead of people. Yeah, early in research, yes, but later on, of course, we're doing drug trials on people, so that one's false. The research program has been approved by the medical staff. I don't think they have a say on this. Research program has been approved by the governing authority. I don't think they have time to approve every single research at a big academic medical center, so that one sounds false. Risk should be clearly explained in understandable language to each individual subject. Well, yeah, that's it. That's autonomy. That's informed consent, right? And we do informed consent for treatment, but for human subjects research, you absolutely have to explain the risk. So yeah, D looks like the right answer. That's the other three are definitely wrong. So I think even if I didn't know D was right, I think I could get there. So let's go with D.
And it's D.
It is D. All right. Hey, I'm on a roll. Now I'm probably going to get this one wrong. Which of the following are commonly recognized? Oh, I hate commonly recognized to be a right of each patient, except, oh, I'm sure glad I noticed the except. So all of them are recognized except. So 3 of these are going to be commonly recognized and 1 isn't. I'm looking for the negative here. So receive considerate and respectful care. Yeah, that is a patient right. Access protective services. Yeah, I think I would guess that's a right. Communicate with a caregiver in the language of the patient's choosing. That's one, that's one that I think is California is different. I believe in California that we have said that they have to provide translation, but I don't think that's nationally accepted. So I'm going to hold on that one. And be informed about and participate in decisions. Well, that's probably the number 1 patient right, informed consent. So I think A is a right. I think B is a right. I know D is a right. C is the one I don't think it is nationally recognized. So I'm going back to that commonly recognized. So I'm going to go with C as the one that isn't. So that C is going to be my answer.
Yeah, I think that's only in California, is it right?
I think I think it is, and that's certainly a distractor because I have to think about California versus national, and commonly recognized is a really fuzzy way of putting it. It's, I think, recognized statutorily in California, but maybe it's not as common elsewhere. And scary, but true. Number six. And I think at this point, if people want to chime in and give their answers, but don't jump for it. Really work your way through it before you come up with an answer. A conflict of interest may be only a matter of degree and does not exist. Okay, so got several issues here. It does not exist when a healthcare executive refuses to. So this is a weird question because the first part about may only be a matter of degree, I don't know if that matters, right? So a conflict of interest uh, does exist, and I read that at first it does not exist. So does exist. Can I just say exists? Conflict of interest exists when a healthcare executive refuses to. So I'm looking for something where they're refusing to do things. So refuse to accept gifts or benefits with an implied expectation. No, we want people to do that. We want them to refuse that. Okay. So that's not a conflict of interest. Uses authority or information to make a decision that affects the organization in adverse manners. So no, we don't want people to make bad decisions. So that's not. If you refuse to do that, that's not a problem. Um, disclose to the appropriate authority any direct or indirect financial or personal interest that pose questions. Well, that's kind of the classic definition of conflict of interest. So if you refuse to disclose the information, yeah, that would be a conflict of interest because when you have a conflict, you're supposed to disclose it and then recuse yourself from the decision. So if you refuse to do that, I think that one would be the conflict. I'm going to look at D, allow a friend to benefit from his authority or his or her authority or inside information. Well, if you refuse to do that, that's not a conflict. So A, B, and D look false and C looks like it is, but because of the double kind of negatives there, I'm going to look at that again. Conflict of interest may be a matter of degree, does exist when they refuse to disclose there. Yeah, so I'm going to go with C.
So when the question's kind of fuzzy like this one, where it's a little wordy and everything, do you recommend maybe trying to fit in the answer as, when you're stating the question, or how would you kind of approach that piece?
Well, one is to really make sure I'm reading the question carefully enough and not missing. Like, you know, I literally my first reading I said does not exist because does exist sounds weird to me, right? So since the word does is there, I had to be really careful of what I was reading. And then when a healthcare executive refuses to, well, that meant that what I was really doing was looking for the one that would be a conflict of interest. Um, so you can kind of read, so a conflict of interest is when you refuse to accept gifts. Okay, short, sweet. Yes, if you refuse to accept gifts, you're good. Refuse to make bad decisions. Nope, that's good. Refuse to disclose your conflict. That's bad. Refuse to allow a friend to benefit. Nope, that's good. So I can eliminate them that way, but I'm trying to read them each from that root of refusing to do something. Because this is a weirdly written question. And that's why I want to make sure that I'm not twisting or leaving something out as I answer it. So, as I keep saying, we're not rushed. We got 6 hours to take this thing, and no one's going to do that. So, when you have a question that's fuzzy like this, spend the time, spend a few minutes. It's not gonna be a problem for you. You're not gonna run out of time, but you're more likely to get the answer right if you spend the time on it. Let's go to 7. You're 7. Okay. This fits well. Okay. Healthcare executive with opposing duties, meeting one of which makes it impossible to meet the other, has a. Okay, so you've got two separate duties, maybe to two different people, and you can only do one of them. Well, that's really the definition of a conflict of interest. So A is definitely going to be true. That's a given. That's by definition. You have a management ethical dilemma, also true, but not as true as A. A is more specific. So yes, it's a management ethical dilemma, but the dilemma is the conflict of interest. So I'm not going to go with B. I like A better. Need for consultants. You know, we have ethical consultants, but I think most of the time we know it. We know it's right. You know, you don't need someone to tell you it's right, usually. So C's wrong. You don't need one. Responsibility to protect themselves. No, your responsibility is protect your organization. What's your primary interest? You have a fiduciary duty to your organization. They hired you, they're paying you, you should do what you said you do. So D is going to be wrong. So just just on the definition, I would have gone with A, but I could also eliminate the others as well. And B, of course, again, is true, but not as good an answer. So we'll go with A.
Any thoughts on when questions have, like you said, A and B both kind of have, both are
Yeah,
true,
and
but
that's really a problem with multiple choices that you get sometimes where the distractor is not wrong, it's just not as good an answer. And look for the one that answers the question more fully, right? So a management ethical dilemma is a pretty general thing where a conflict of interest is very specific to it. And that's why I think A is a better answer here. But there are times, and it's not in a well-written question, there will be times when you're really torn between two of the answers. And I hate to tell you, but sometimes you're going to flip a coin in your mind, right? That you cannot figure it out. You've eliminated two of them, but you've got two that you're torn between. Well, 50-50 is still better than 1 out of 4, if you're guessing. But really try to figure out when you got two that look like they could be right, which one answers the question better. 8. Okay. It's another negative here, a non-legitimate reason to release information from a patient's medical record. So I'm thinking, okay, I've got legal issues and ethical issues here, but when can I release information legitimately? So 3 of these should be legitimate reasons and 1 is not, right? So the information is subpoenaed by a court order. Yeah, that's legitimate. Requested by the spouse or next of kin. That's the classic, it depends. You know, is the patient unconscious? Is the patient saying, please share this? Not always. I'm gonna put a hold on that one because I think that's the one that's going to be non-legitimate usually. So we'll hold on that. Um, the patient becomes incompetent. Oh, wait a minute. When the patient becomes incompetent, then you can give it to the decision maker. But when the patient becomes incompetent, you can't release it to the newspaper. That's not a legitimate thing. Just being incompetent doesn't override your duty to maintain privacy. So that one now seems better than B now. And reporting statistics for research. project. Well, yeah, no, you could report statistics. You can't report patient identifiable information, but you can report all sorts of stuff from the patient record for statistics as long as the patient can't be identified. So that one's not it. So when subpoenaed by a court order is legitimate, reporting statistics is legitimate, requested by spouse or next of kin might be, might not be, but C is definitely not a legitimate reason to release information. So again, I got two that I'm not totally sure about, but B is a much stronger answer here, because incompetence does not allow you to do it where the spouse does have legitimate reasons, next of kin has legitimate reasons. So I'm going to go with C. And,
It was B.
oh, yeah, I think that's wrong. I'm going to disagree. No, it's a tough one. But when the patient becomes incompetent, you can't release the information just generally, but you can release it to whoever is the decision maker, which might be the spouse or next of kin. But boy, that's a tough one because you've got good arguments on both of them of why they're wrong, why they're not legitimate. And so you don't have to get 100%, and I just proved that.
I think, Richard, the C is assuming there's like a advanced care directive, something like that,
Yeah,
that is already in place, although this question doesn't lay that premise, but that is why I think C is probably not the right answer. Because
yeah,
if there's nothing that exists in the patient's chart to allow any other person to, like a designated representative, which is, the way, at least at my organization, allows the patient's health information to be released, not for that person to make the decisions, but just to have knowledge of it. But there has to be some sort of documentation for when the patient becomes incompetent.
right. And
For
then you
its,
say, who is the person to release it to? Because if the patient has done an advance directive and the
yeah,
person designated is not the, spouse or next of kin, then they don't have any more right to the information at that point.
exactly.
On the other hand, with things like, sexually transmitted diseases, then yes, you can legitimately talk to the next of kin or to the spouse. So this one, I don't really like this question, but I never like questions I get wrong. So, you know, um, yeah, interesting. Well, let's go again. You don't have to get 100%. So I'm going to shake this one off and move on to the next one.
Right.
Ha. Which of the following is not, what's with all these negative questions here? Which of the following is not an example of a breach of fiduciary duty? So I got to know what a fiduciary duty is, and then breaching it. And then three of these are going to be breaches and one is not. I'm going to look for the one that is not. So in my mind here, I'm thinking, what is a fiduciary duty? And I quickly remember from my ethics class that a fiduciary duty is when you're supposed to make decisions to benefit the other person, not yourself. So a physician is supposed to say, I'm treating the patient to benefit them, not because I need to charge Blue Cross for it. Your stockbroker is supposed to make fiduciary decisions of what's the best thing for you to buy and sell, not them get the commission. So anytime you're making a decision on behalf of another person, it's making it in their best interest. So breaching it, of course, is not making it in their best interest. And I'm looking for one that is not a breach. Okay, so an executive who is distracted by a personal and or family situation resulting in poor performance. Well, that is a breach of your fiduciary duty because You have a duty to do good work. That's why you were hired. That's why you're being paid. So you've got a duty to your employer. So A is not a or A is a breach of fiduciary duty, so it's not a not. So we're going to cross that one off. An executive whose judgment and effectiveness is impaired due to substance abuse. Not that that ever happens, but if it did, that would be a breach of fiduciary duty. An executive who relies on subordinates to relay appropriate information. Okay, now, this is again an example of make sure you're reading carefully, because if you know that your subordinates are providing inappropriate information, that would be a breach. But if they're relaying appropriate information and you're relying on them to do it, nothing wrong with that. So if the information's good, then you're good. So that one is not a breach of fiduciary duty. So I think it's going to be C, but let's look at D. An executive who fails to maintain competencies in one's field. Yeah. You know, you're supposed to be hired or competent when you're hired, but you're supposed to keep that. That's why ACHE does continuing education. So failing to maintain competency is a breach. So A, B, and D are all breaches of your fiduciary duty. Therefore, C is the only one that is not a breach of duty. So with all the double, triple negatives in there, I'm going to go with C.
And it's C.
Legal aspects of, they're mixing legal and ethics here. Legal aspects of consent include all the following except. Okay, so thinking, what do I know about consent and what is required for consent to be legitimate? So you say to the patient, I'm going to do surgery, and the patient says, yes, go ahead and do the surgery. What's required there? Well, it has to be voluntary. Yep. It has to be informed. Yes, the patient must know what you're doing, why you're doing it. Medically sound. Medically sound. I'm not sure what that is in this situation. The treatment has to be medically sound, right? But that's not part of consent, right? So that's if the doctor says, I'm going to do an operation on you, and the operation is not medically sound, you can still consent to it. It's still malpractice. So yeah, uh, C does not make sense for me to be part of consent. So I'm going to hold on C. D must be competent. Well, not so much the consent is competent, but the patient has to be competent to make the decisions. So we're not going to allow 3-year-olds to say, no, I don't want a shot, right? Because they're not competent to make that decision. You know, you must be an adult, you must be mentally sound enough to understand, blah, 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 to be competent. So that is an aspect of the consent, right? Is the patient being competent. So A, B, D are all parts of consent. C is not. So I'm going to go with C as the answer here.
And it looks like we have some agreement in the chat as well.
It
And
is.
it's C.
It is C. All right. Do we have more ethics? Or we go? Oh,
That was
we're
the
going to move to
end of
law.
ethics.
Okay, we're going to move to law.
Any
Anyone
questions
before
about
we do, though,
ethics?
anyone have any questions about ethics or how to answer the questions or how to study for it?
Well, I would like to ask a question. What are some
Sure.
while we're studying?
But as you broke up, I didn't hear the whole question there.
Oh, my apologies. What are some tips to help us study for the ethics portion?
Okay, well, like I was saying earlier, I would start with the ACHE Code of Ethics, right? And uh, in our samples, we didn't have any questions out of it, but there really are questions. And you're not going to memorize all of it. Don't even try, but make sure you know the 6 areas, duty to patients and others served, duty to the organization, duty to the community, duty to the profession, things like that. Make sure you're familiar with those so you can see where things fit in. Look at the AMA and ACA or ANA one as well, American Medical Association, American Nurse Association, just to have a sense of it, because there could be questions about codes of ethics more generally for other professions. And then think about just general ethical concepts. So it's not going to get real heavily into um, an ethical theory by any means, thank God. But it is going to look at some specific issues such as conflict of interest, such as fiduciary duties, duty of care, things like that as a health administrator, you are hopefully following. So if you're not familiar with those, I think you can just find a general ethical overview online. But presuming you've had an ethics class at some point, you should probably have at least been exposed to them. And you can bring those back pretty easily.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure. Does anyone else have any input on ways to study?
No, I think you covered kind of the topics that I, looked at when I was studying as well. I think that was based on your recommendation back then as well. So
Okay, it works. Good.
Yeah, it worked. Definitely helps.
Excellent. Good. Other questions? Hearing none, let's talk about law and regulations.
All right.
And as a lawyer, I have to, of course, say that the answer to everything is it depends, right? That we don't like giving definite answers because things are fact driven. So, we try to dissect all those gray areas in between, but hopefully the answers are going to be more direct than in a real legal suit. There are several areas that I recommend focusing on. Again, you can read this list yourself, so I'm not going to read it to you, but you ought to be familiar with some of the major laws. And in the video, I broke it into the different areas, such as patient protection and antitrust and fraud and abuse. And, if you use that as kind of a scaffold to put the laws in, if I was starting from scratch, I would make a list of every healthcare related law I ran across and then put it into that thing and just at least be able to know basically what each of the laws does. So when someone says EMTALA, when someone says Stark, you ought to have a basic idea of what it is. And yeah, so there is some memorization in there. Be familiar with who accredits and who regulates us. So what does OSHA do? What does FDA do, et cetera, their basic role. This is where we get the overlap of law and ethics, and they really do very much overlap. But think about informed consent, not just what's the ethical side of it, patient autonomy, but what's legally required. Same with confidentiality. So there's a lot of material in this one, and that's one of the reasons it's such a big section of the test. And I think that if you organize what you're trying to do in a logical way, it makes it easier. If you build that scaffold, then as you prepare, as you look at these things, you can find a way to organize it so it's stuck in your head, which is what you really want. The bad news is this is the one area of the test that is really not covered by the well-managed healthcare organization. So you are going to have to use some other outside sources. And you probably don't want to get an entire book about health law, but you might. It's up to you. It's a question of what do you think you need? And if you feel like this is an area where you need more information, then do it. But if not, you could probably find the information through other sources. So let's move on. All right. So federal regulations that govern uh, federal regulations that govern all the clinical laboratory testing performed on humans, except, okay, I've got a negative here, except clinical trials. So who's regulating clinical laboratories? I don't know. I don't do anything with laboratories. So let me look back at that question, see if I get any more information. So I'm looking at federal regulations. Now, that's going to be key because it's not saying the organization, it's saying the regulations. Right? So that's going to help me because I can eliminate anything that doesn't look like a law or regs, even though I have absolutely no idea how you regulate laboratories. I mean, I know nothing about laboratories other than they do something with blood and other body products, but that's all I know. Okay, so I'm going to look for federal regulations. The Joint Commission Laboratory. No, that's not a regulation. That's an organization, and it's not federal. That's a private organization, right? So for two reasons, I can get rid of A. A is false. College of American Pathologists. Yeah, well, those again, the college is not a federal organization. So even if they're setting standards, and I don't know if they do or not, they probably do, but even if they do, they're not federal. So that one's false. Clinical laboratory improvement amendments. Now, one is amendments means what are they amending? They're amending a law. Okay, so that sounds like a federal law, probably. It's about clinical laboratories. It's trying to make them better. I don't know what the content is of this. I really don't. But of the ones I've looked at so far, it's the only one that sounds like it's an actual law that's doing regulation. So I like C. D, U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Okay, now that's federal. We got the U.S. there. That's federal, but it is a regulator, not regulation. So A and B are out because they're not federal. D is out because it's not regulations. And C sounds like it's both about regulation, about laboratories, and it is a form of regulation. Amendments to a law sounds best. So knowing absolutely nothing about how laboratories are regulated, I can narrow it down, and I think C is going to be my best answer.
And it looks like we have consensus in the chat as well.
It does.
See, it is.
And we were all correct. And last year, as part of our committee, we had someone who was a laboratory director. And boy, he knew this stuff right and left, but I don't, and you probably don't, and you don't have to. You can do it by eliminating the ones that are wrong. You can narrow it down to the one that's most likely a right answer, even without knowing the specifics. Number two, okay, under federal law, okay, so again, looking federal law, patient comes to an emergency department with an emergency condition, and if you work anywhere near hospitals, you're probably having lights going flashing in your mind saying EMTALA, EMTALA, right? Because we have a federal law about treating patients who present to an emergency department. So that's the one jumping out at me. So I'm thinking that's probably the law we're talking about. So when a patient comes to an emergency department with an emergency condition, what's got to happen? Okay. With a few exceptions, the patient's ability to pay may be considered, And if you know EMTALA, you know that it's the opposite. It's they may not be considered except a few exceptions. So that's again to read carefully because you don't want to stick the not may not be considered. You don't want to do that in your mind. You want to make sure you're getting the words may be considered. So that one's false. With few exceptions, the patient's condition must be stabilized before he or she is transferred or discharged. Yeah, that's the two prongs of EMTALA. One is you must do a screening exam, and two, you must stabilize. But there's an exception, that is if the patient wants to be transferred or if the hospital can't treat you and you're transferred to one with more capacity. So yeah, B is looking real good because that is what EMTALA requires. A police officer may be asked to authorize treatment. Well, no. If you have an emergency condition, remember we've got emergency authorization, right? We presume that the patient would consent if they're not able to. So we wouldn't ask a police officer under any circumstances, and they don't have the authority to do that. So yeah, C is totally wrong. Hospital has no duty to treat the patient if he or she is not a patient or a member of the medical staff. I think that should be of a member, patient of a member of the medical staff, not or. I think that's a typo. Well, yeah, EMTALA says you've got a duty to treat anyone who shows up at the emergency department with a medical emergency. It doesn't say anything about having a prior relationship with any member of the medical staff. That's specifically not what EMTALA is doing. So if you know what EMTALA does, just those two things, screening exam and stabilize, you know that A is wrong, you know that B is right, C is the stupid answer, and D is wrong. So we're going to go with B, and so is everyone in the chat, I think. Let's go with B. B is correct. So, this is one of those cases, okay, you got to know what these laws are, and worse, you got to know what the initials stand for, right? So hopefully you have made a list of all the healthcare related laws you've run across. You've got the ones I talked about in the video, and you can say, okay, so dumping indigent patients in public hospitals, that's certainly patient rights there. So let's see, ERISA is about insurance. Has nothing to do with that. ERISA says, you know, that actually ERISA does a lot of things, but none of them is related to patient dumping. So we're going to say D is wrong, or A is wrong. COBRA. Now this is a almost it's almost like Trivial Pursuit here. COBRA is the Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, and Congress passes these regularly. Consolidated omnibus mean they throw a bunch of stuff in there. And one year, one of the things they threw into it was EMTALA. So EMTALA was actually passed as part of this act. So it's almost Trivial Pursuit, but if you know that EMTALA is the anti-dumping law, and you know that it was part of COBRA, you would go with B. So I'm going to go with B so far. Parka. No, not a winter jacket. Is that, anyone know what parka is? I don't know. It's something act. I honestly have no idea. Apparently neither does anyone else. Okay, we're going to leave park out because none of us know what it is. And then Hill-Burton. Now, someone put down D and said they think it's Hill-Burton. And so let's think about it. Hill-Burton was a law in the 1950s and 60s, and I think maybe through the 70s, that gave federal grants to communities to build public hospitals and public clinics if they were, underbedded. That is, they didn't have enough hospital beds, and in exchange for the money, they had to provide free care for a certain number of patients. So a hospital would say it had a Hill-Burton obligation because They got the federal money, but that was not dumping. That was the obligation to treat. It wasn't dumping the patients out. So A's wrong, D is wrong. I sure hope C is wrong because I don't know what it is. Cobra is right, even though we're more commonly going to know it as EMTALA. So I'm going to go with B.
That's B.
It's B. And when you're making your study list under EMTALA, make sure you put in AKA Cobra.
I looked up PARCA. It's the Patient Access to Responsible Care Alliance. So it's a coalition of 80 consumer and provider groups.
Oh, so it's not a law. Okay. I was assuming the A at the end was going to be ACT, but I guess not. Interesting. Thank you, Ryan.
Mhm.
Let's go to 4. Okay. Ownership and control of medical records associated with hospital delivered services rests with. So, okay, who owns the record? Now, organizing all this in my head, what do I know about medical record law? Not much. I know that under HIPAA and state laws, patients have a right to access the information, but ownership and control of the record itself is with whoever actually created it, right? So the question is specifically saying associated with hospital delivered services. So the hospital owns the record. If it was a physician office, it would be the physician owned it, but they're saying hospitals delivered services. So A looks right. B's wrong if it's hospital delivered services. C's wrong because it's the patient has the right to the information, but not the record itself. And D, the insurer actually only has access to the information because the patient said you can share this with my insurer when you bill them, but they don't own the record. So it's got to be A. I've got true, false, false, false. So it's got to be A.
That's A.
And that's what people in the chat said too.
Mhm.
More initials. Okay, rules governing acceptance and treatment of emergency patients. So isn't that what we just talked about a minute ago? It is. And I said that we usually know the rule as the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act. So yeah, it's known as EMTALA, yes. Okay, A is good. EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, yeah, no. That's false. Stark 2 is physician self-referral. When you own the laboratory and you're writing the lab tests and you say you can only get it done at my lab, so I make money. Nope, that's wrong. Nothing to do with emergency patients. But I've got Cobra here, right? And I just said before, Cobra is often confused because EMTALA was part of Cobra. When it passed, we used to talk about Cobra. I was thinking about, yeah, I got bitten by the Cobra when he paid the fine. But we've more recently been knowing, we've been using the term EMTALA, not Cobra now. I don't think a lot of people remember Cobra. So I've got actually 2 correct answers here again. And before I went with Cobra because it was the only one that was right there. But here, I think EMTALA is a better answer than Cobra. Well, I would hope they wouldn't put the 2 in there because that's really a distractor. But I mean, they're both correct, but A is more specific. It is more right. This Cobra covered a lot of things. EMTALA is definitely the treatment of emergency patients. So I'm going to go with A.
That's A.
It is, as did the people in the chat. Good. All right. Number 6. Ew, lots of words. What is this with all this laboratory stuff? Or laboratories. Okay, a joint venture laboratory. Okay, so I think I'm going to look at the joint venture, not the lab itself. Owned by hospital and physicians on its medical staff. Okay, so really doesn't matter. It's a laboratory. It's we got a joint venture between the hospital and the docs, and would probably be in violation of fraud and abuse if it were to. Okay, so I'm looking through my head at all the fraud and abuse laws. So I've got the False Claims Act, and I've got the self-referral laws and other stuff, and trying to figure out which of the fraud and abuse laws might apply here. So marketed services to both investors and non-investors. Well, no, nothing wrong with that. I mean, if you're saying this is open and doctors who aren't investors can still refer patients, that sounds good. Okay, no, A is going to be false. Offer ownership shares at the same price to refers and non-refers. So, I'm looking for a violation. And if you're selling shares of the stock, regardless of whether people referring business to you, that's fine. There's no violation there. So B is false. Require investors to refer business to it. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah. That's back on Stark. That's our self-referral. So if the doctor is referring business to a laboratory that he or she owns, we have a potential violation of the Stark laws. If you're requiring them to do that, I think you're definitely running against fraud abuse laws. So C is looking like it's the right answer. Going to check D. Base its profit distributions on the amount of capital contributed, not on referrals. Yeah, because if you're saying you contributed 10% of the capital, you own 10% of the lab, and you get 10% of the profits, that's fine. But if you say the more patients you refer to us, the more of our profit you get, that is not fine. That is a violation of at least one, maybe two different laws, anti-kickback as well as self-referral. So D is wrong. So A, B, and D are not violations of fraud and abuse. C is. So I'm going to go with C.
And there's consensus in the chat.
And we're all right. Okay, in general, I love words like that. In general, courts exhibit what attitude regarding controversies over medical staff privileges. Okay, so I'm focusing here on medical staff privileges. And if it's in court, there must be some kind of lawsuit about medical staff privileges. And usually that's, I want to be on the medical staff, and they won't let me, or they kicked me out for some reason. All right, so what do courts do there? Human lives are at stake, and courts must intervene to protect physician rights to save those lives. No, if the hospital thinks the doctor's killing patients, the court is not going to say you must keep them on medical staff. So that one's false. If the decision is supported by reasonable evidence, courts will not substitute their judgment for that of the hospital board. So the hospital board, the governing board, has the final say about who's on the medical staff, right? And if they're following due process and they've got rules and they're allowing due process, then yeah, courts will not substitute their judgment. That one looks good. Hospitals must not be permitted to interfere with the doctor-patient relationship. Yeah, right. No, particularly when hospitals are being subject to lawsuit if they allowed a doctor on staff who was incompetent, didn't monitor that doctor. The hospital is liable, so they definitely interfere, so that one's false. Courts may not entertain suits regarding medical staff privileges. Yeah, no, there's lots of them. We get them all the time. So that one is 100% wrong. So let's see. A is wrong. B is correct. C is wrong. D is wrong. So B is the right answer. And B is the right answer. We only got a few people who've been consistently in the chat. Come on, let the rest of you jump in here. Okay. The thrust of antitrust legislation as applied to healthcare field is, okay, now I got to admit something. I am one of the few people in the world who is fascinated by antitrust legislation. In fact, it's what convinced me originally to go to law school. I was talking to a lawyer about some antitrust issues, and she gave me a book to read, and I was so fascinated by it. I said, I want to go be a lawyer and learn more about this. And most people don't like economics and they don't like law, and I combine the two, and I love antitrust. So I'm weird that way. Okay, so that's one of the areas I gave you of knowing the antitrust laws. There's a few big ones. Sherman antitrust is the simplest one. It's 100 something, 120 years old now, and it's real simple. The others have followed, really just built on it. So is the thrust of antitrust to contain costs? Well, no, not always. That's one of the things, but what else are we concerned about? We're concerned about quality. And two hospitals that are conspiring and they're maintaining costs, but their quality is going down. That's not a good thing. So A is wrong. Contain rising costs of independent single unit hospital. Well, no, antitrust often is looking at mergers and saying, will allowing these independent single unit hospitals to merge, will that bring down competition in the marketplace in a way that would increase costs? So this one's wrong. It's kind of backwards. Monitor the scope of health services provided in a given area. Monitor? Huh? I mean, if there's a lawsuit, they're going to look at who's providing what and who's got what market share, but they're not, antitrust law doesn't routinely set up a way to monitor the services. So that one's definitely wrong. So A is only half right. B is wrong. C is wrong. D is almost the classic definition. Antitrust is a law that is trying to make the marketplace work. And it's looking at cost and access and quality and trying to say, let's make the marketplace work to protect the public's interest. So D's the definition of antitrust purpose, and I'm going to go with D.
And so did everyone in the chat. And it's D.
It is D. But someone said D with a question mark. They didn't try trust themselves, but nope, you had it right. D is the correct answer. Now, one of these questions with a lot of words, so I'm going to make sure I'm being really careful. I'm going to keep reminding myself I've got 6 hours to finish this thing. I don't have to rush. I can make sure I'm really understanding what they're getting at with all these words here. So, two independent healthcare organizations interested in discussing a joint venture. Probably doesn't matter that it's a cancer treatment program. Would be wise to initially consult with legal counsel. Okay, so I've got two organizations and they're thinking about maybe kind of in the future discussing it. They're interested in discussing. Why should they consult their counsel? Why should they consult their attorney? So what are these two organizations concerned about that they need to ask their lawyer a question? Okay, determine if liability is equal, even though disproportionately owned. I don't think so. I don't think that's a big issue at this point. Financial gains or losses could be shared unequally. That's really part of your negotiation. That's not a issue for your lawyer. Discussions might violate antitrust statutes. Yes. You want to make sure that you are not doing something that is a conspiracy in restraint of trade. Right? So you have two organizations independent, they are talking to each other about something that's going to change the marketplace. May not violate antitrust statutes, but you might want to bring your lawyer in just to make sure you don't stumble into it. So C looks right. Current facilities can accommodate the program. Why would you ask your lawyer that? First of all, who cares if you're opening a joint venture if current facilities can accommodate? That's not a problem, but it's definitely not a legal problem. So we're going to throw D out as far as we can. So let's see. A and B are negotiating points. D's wrong. C is it. That's why you want to check with your lawyer to make sure you don't end up accidentally violating antitrust laws or intentionally violating antitrust laws. Don't do that either. Antitrust violations are very, very expensive, so try not to do it. We'll go with C.
C in the chat as well, and it's C.
Okay.
One thing I wanted to quickly highlight that you've done on a couple other questions, which I think is a great tip. If you don't know anything about the lab, you don't know anything about a cancer center, treatment center, just look for the keywords in the question. You don't necessarily have to know about the program specifically that they're talking about. It's more about, the idea behind it. And, this would apply to other areas within healthcare too, not necessarily a cancer treatment center or a lab. It could be hospitals, it could be clinics. So just pay attention to those keywords, and you can always kind of look away from some of the distractor words or ones that are more specific that don't have anything to do with the actual question itself per se.
Yeah, in my mind, I'm editing the question and I'm getting rid of things that I don't need to think about. And here I didn't need to think that it was a cancer treatment. You want to make sure you're focusing on what is the question really asking. And I think I've mentioned this once or a million times, but you have plenty of time. Really make sure you're understanding what the question asks before you answer it. Don't jump through, don't read it so quickly you're missing words or you're focusing in the wrong area. Okay, let's go to number 10.
I think this is our last law question.
Oh, thank God. Which of the following is the clear trend? Okay, clear trend, not just what do we think is happening. This is a clear trend regarding hospital liability for actions of medical staff. So I'm looking at when is the hospital required for the doctor leaving the clamp inside the patient? Okay, what's the trend here? The hospital may be held liable for physician's negligence, even though the physician is an independent contractor. That sounds true because you can be liable for your own actions related to monitoring them, to giving them credentials when they're incompetent, all sorts of things, but also you can be held liable for their actions in circumstances, even though they're not an employee. They could still be an agent of the hospital, or they could be perceived as an agent and get you in trouble that way. Okay, so A looks good. Hospitals are not liable because they're simply physical sites where the patients receive treatment from privately retained physicians. That was probably true back in 1905. Not true anymore. So B's wrong. Courts are becoming more reluctant to impose liability on hospitals for negligence of facilities. So that would be a trend if it was true, right? So the question is it true? And the answer is no. No, they're not. more reluctant. So I'm going to say C is wrong. And hospital is liable only if the physician is an employee. That is wrong, because if they are seen as an agent, and that's particularly true with the hospital-based physicians, pathology, emergency, anesthesia, the hospital may be seen as may be liable because they're seen as an agent, even if they're not an employee. So D's wrong. So let's see, I've got A is right. I've got B is wrong. I've got C is wrong. I've got D is wrong. Yeah, so I'm going to go with A.
And it's A.
And it's A. Okay, any question? Ryan, are we going to 11:30 or 12 today?
It's till 12.
12. Okay, good. So I didn't take all of Mary's time. Good. So anyone have any questions about law and regulations, how to study for it, anything else? How to answer these?
Do you know of any books that might help supplement what wasn't in the or what's not included in the
Yeah,
well-managed healthcare?
yeah, there are. The problem is that the books that are aimed like at either undergraduate or graduate health law class tend to be really long. And you probably, I think I would go online looking. I think the video, at least uh, uh, the video at least identified the areas for you, and then I think I would again think of it as a scaffold and attach uh, the the different laws to it to familiarize yourself with those. Um, yeah, I mean, it's not one. I'll look to see if I can find one that's a little simpler as just a study guide, and if so, we can send it out with the stuff we're bringing up. We'll put it in the parking lot for next time. Let's see
Okay,
what I can find there.
perfect.
And someone says, no question, sounds like patience and slow thinking is key. And that is it exactly. Right? It is so hard when you're doing this test not to rush, because we just routinely think, oh, I gotta keep doing this. I gotta jump in. And no, deep breath. You got so much time that you really have the time to make sure you're reading the questions carefully, reading the choices carefully, and you're more likely to get the right answer if you spend the time on each one. Okay, so yes, patience and slow thinking is absolutely it.
And I think what helped me with the laws, like you said, is knowing the different ones, or at least, you have the acronyms, knowing what they stand for, knowing what that EMTALAs include in COBRA. Kind of
Yeah.
studying those facts definitely helps. And then you can kind of walk through the questions a little bit easier that have those in them, or at least mention those individual laws.
Yeah, because I mean, you're not going to memorize everything in the world. You never are, but you
Yeah.
want to be able to say, I recognize that acronym. Oh, yeah, it is. Right. So you want to have enough of it in your head that you can bring it back. And this is true for a lot of when we get to financial and all the financial ratios, same type of thing. You don't need to know all the formulas, but it's nice to have an idea of the types of ratios, and then under that scaffold, put the ones that you think fit into each one so you can recognize the terms. You got a lot of stuff in your head. It's just a question of organizing it so you can find it again. I like using a matrix. That's just my way of organizing stuff. So for this one, I would make a matrix, and I would list the laws on one side. I would probably put the year in, general principles. I'd put initials in, and then I would just one or two sentences about what it does. Somebody asks, are all the exam questions grouped together in one set, or are they grouped in sets of 50s? No, they aren't. They're not organized by area, so all the questions jump back and forth. You got to keep moving your head back and forth, and you can uh, they're all 230 are together, right? So you can go through them. You can go back at any point. If you're doing it at the computer center, which most people do. You can check it so that it's one that says, I'm going to go back and look at this. So if you're not sure or you want to double check, you can indicate it and then go back at the end. And you can go back at any point to any of them. So every once in a while, you'll answer something you're not sure of, and then 10 questions later, there's one that gives you more information. So maybe you're going to go back. You do want to be careful changing your answers. Always want to be careful there, but you can if you need to do that.
And like Rick's been saying, you have 6 hours, which is a huge amount of time. So if you have questions you're not completely sure of, or there's some where there's two answers that are correct, but one might be more correct, you can always flag those. And at the end, after you've gone through all the questions, go back through all the ones that you've flagged and kind of review them. You'll have plenty of time to do that.
And you even have time to get up and walk around if you need it for a few minutes after, every hour, just stand up and move your arms around, get the blood flowing, go to the bathroom if you need it. Don't feel like you're rushed and need to torture yourself. I haven't heard of anyone running out of time now that I think about it. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, I'm going to turn this over to Mary.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, let's get started with next slide. So the governance and organizational structure questions cover these 5 knowledge areas. I'm not going to take the time to walk through this, as I'm sure it's in the slides you can review separately. So let's just dive right into the questions. For governance, there's going to be a lot of board questions. Maybe some of you have served on voluntary boards, or if you have been in like a CEO position with a board governance structure, these questions may be easier for you. Most of them come across as common sense, but we'll just walk through them. So boards have committees. One committee is the finance committee. So the finance committee of the board is responsible for what? So let's just walk through these. A is monitoring budget performance. Sounds pretty reasonable. Let's keep that in mind. B is awarding CEO increases and bonuses. Well, they may be able to propose to the board at large how much the CEO should be paid, or their bonus, annual bonuses, but it's not the committee itself that would be doing that awarding. Act on behalf of the board in their absence. No, I don't. I don't even know if that question makes sense, that the finance committee of the board is acting on behalf of the board in the absence. And then let's look at the last option, permitting joint ventures with other corporations. The finance committee itself, highly unlikely, in my opinion, something that specific for a responsibility. I would just say that maybe that could be true, but as far as the best answer, and that's what we're looking for in these multiple choice questions, I am going to go with A. Okay, we have, who else? Do we have some others? I see a B there, other people. I don't have the whole chat board up, so I can't see everyone's. But I'm going to go with A as the best answer. Can we see that, Ryan?
Yes, and it looks like many people in the chat also agreed.
There we go. And again, just a reminder, these multiple choice questions may have things that are true, but you're always looking for the best of all the answers. So that's where I think this number 1 question kind of fits. Let's go on to the next question. The next question is, I like these questions because they're shorter than Richard's questions. The most critical committee that requires tenured board members is A, audit committee, B, finance committee, C, nominating committee, or D, executive committee. The most critical committee. So we're looking at the committee that needs, now it's not the most critical committee to the board, but it's the most critical committee that requires board members that have the most tenure, the most length of service on the board. So reading the question and understanding the question, which could be easily misinterpreted as like, oh, what's the most critical committee on a board? You may throw yourself off there. The key to this question is requires tenured board members. And in looking at the 4 choices, I'm going to go with C, the nominating committee, because the nominating committee is going to recommend the slate for the next year's leaders, if that should change as far as like the chair of the board. So typically nominating committees will have prior chairs of the board on there. So that's my answer. Let's see, Ryan.
It is C.
Is
Looks
C.
like a lot of people in the chat thought it was D, the executive committee, which I can see where that can come from, just because you think most tenured, you think people with a lot of experience. Why do you think, Mary, it would be
The
more leaning
nominating
towards
committee,
C?
oftentimes nominating committees actually require for prior executive, like the immediate past chair, to be on the committee, the chair-elect to be on this committee, because the nominating committee is basically proposing the leadership of the board for the following year or the following term. So that is why I think it's the best answer for having tenured board members that would be, have the history and the understanding of the board. The executive committee could have members that don't necessarily have the greatest tenure, but definitely the nominating committee draws from that. That's my answer. I'm open to other people on the call here that have served on boards in the past or currently that might have a difference of opinion. You can chime in. Some of these answers, like a couple of them that we went over in law and regulations, there's certainly those that have answers, more than one answer to be true. But this is, I'm looking for the best one.
No, and I agree with you. And I think, being on the Cal board helps me understand this question a little bit better. So it could be one of those things where you're drawing more on experience with some of these, but yeah, knowing how the nominating committee is formed, just from being on a board definitely helps.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's go on to the next question. The duty of loyalty requires that. Okay, so the key thing in this question to understand is duty of loyalty. And when you're loyal to something, typically that means that you don't have competing interests. So that would just stray you from being loyal from one organization or one thing to another. So let's just read the options here. The duty of loyalty requires that a board member discloses all of their assets before becoming a board member. Highly unlikely at all assets. Maybe assets that could be of conflict that would, stray, like maybe you have, you have stock or you're a shareholder of a for-profit hospital that's a competitor of the board for the nonprofit hospital that you're on, something like that. Could be, but let's keep going. A board, and I don't like the word all, discloses all of their assets. So that seems a little to be a red flag for that answer for me as well. A board member belongs to as few healthcare organizations as possible. No, I don't think there's any restriction as far as duty of loyalty. Now, if you're, if you belong, I don't know what they quite mean as far as belong to healthcare organizations. That one's a little bit of a strange wording for me, but I don't think it's necessarily that there could be a duty of loyalty situation with B. A board member refrains from conflict of interest. Yes, I think conflict of interest falls squarely under the duty of loyalty understanding. And then last, a board member serves out his or her entire term. I mean, we'd like for board members, but if you can't serve out your term for one reason or another, I don't think that that really necessarily, in my experience, falls under a duty of loyalty situation. So I think the best answer is C because it directly includes conflict of interest verbiage. So what do we think? Can you reveal the answer?
It is C, and it looks like the chat agreed.
There we go. Okay, we'll go on to question 3.
One quick thing I wanted to point
Oh,
out, I think
yeah,
C kind of helps eliminate B when you think about it, because you can belong to multiple healthcare boards as long as there's not a conflict of interest.
exactly. Yes. Okay. 4, the CEO of a hospital reports to who? And this is in regards to a board of directors. Board chair, the executive committee of the board, the compensation and evaluation committee of the board, or the entire board. Now, if you know anything about boards, I think this is a pretty straightforward question, but we can walk through these options one at a time. To report only to the board chair, unlikely as far as the CEO, because the board, the entire board, is facilitating and providing oversight of the CEO and the hospital performance. So I would not have A. It's too narrow of an answer. The executive committee of the board. Well, this is just expanding it just a little from the board chair, because the executive committee probably has that. And then C, the compensation and evaluation committee of the board. This committee may be directly involved in the board's ability to monitor the performance and then, make the recommendations as far as their compensation and bonuses and increases. But as far as reporting directly to, this is also too narrow of an option. So I'm going to go with the entire board. The CEO really does report to the entire board. Every single board member, if the board is being run correctly, will evaluate the CEO's performance of running whatever hospital or organization. So I'm going with D.
And we have consensus in the chat.
There we go. Okay, next question. I think we're making good time here. Regarding the hiring of employees, the board should be intimately involved in which of the following positions? Okay, so the previous question just talked about who the CEO reports to. So I think the last question, walking through it, pretty much hones in on the answer to this one. But let's just look at the options. So I think key words here as far as should be intimately involved. So board of directors are not intimately involved in day-to-day operations. So I think that would essentially eliminate the option of A and B. And then as well as D, because those clinical personnel, all the employees within the organization, which includes both A and D. So these questions, these answers kind of eliminate each other and just thinking it through, walking it through. So I'm going to go with C, that the only position that the board of directors is intimately involved in hiring is the CEO of the organization. And C. There we go. Okay, next question. Okay, a little bit longer here. A member of the board of a healthcare organization also serves as the medical director of a competing organization. So we've got a situation of a doctor who's on a board of one and then also is the medical director of another organization. And they're competing organizations, very key. So the actual question, now that we have that premise, we've walked ourselves through that premise so we understand what the premise of the question is, which is very important to understand. Which one of the duties of a board is applicable to the situation? So our options are duty of care, duty of obedience, business judgment rule, and the last one is duty of loyalty. So I think what we're looking at here, and we just discussed, is conflict of interest. You know, the buzzwords that come out is also serves competing organization. So what would be the main concern of somebody who's on your board also working or possibly even serving on a board of a competing organization? With that terminology, I don't think duty of care applies or duty of obedience. And frankly, I'm not sure what the business judgment rule is. So I don't know, maybe somebody in the chat or on the board here or on the committee here knows exactly what that is.
I know that one because that's the when someone is suing the board of directors or board of trustees of an organization and saying you made a decision that was really bad and hurt us. The question is, was it a reasonable business decision for them in their judgment?
A legal question. They're sneaking in a legal question into my governance.
There's a lot of overlap on these topics. There really is.
Definitely, definitely. So I'm going with D, duty of loyalty, which we just got done answering, stating that that has to do with a conflict of interest. And that is the concern here with this question is, does this board member, this medical doctor who's on our board, who also works as a medical director of our competitors, is there a duty of loyalty or does that person have a conflict of interest in serving in both of those roles simultaneously? So my answer is D. What do you think? Yep, D. There we go. Okay, let's go on to the next question. And let me know if I'm walking through these too quickly. They're pretty short question and answers. So I'm trying my best to be thorough, but not belabor. The danger of having a large board, and in this question, they're considering a large board as being over 17 members, is A, the board can never have a quorum. Never, that's the first red flag of that answer. Certainly, a large board could have a quorum at one point in time if they get the quorum for a board of 17. So I'm going to disregard A just because it includes the word never. Now it might be harder to have a quorum if you have a large board, but maybe 2/3 quorum, you have to get more people in the door to have your quorum. But I don't like the word never, so I'm going to disregard that one or think that one's not likely. The board will not be able to elect a chairperson. Well, I don't see how the size of the board really has and that is, it's not, the board it'll be harder for the board to elect a chairperson, especially maybe if the chairperson needs, a majority of the board votes or things like that. But to not be able to elect a chairperson just because the board is over 17 members, again, kind of thinking the same way I'm thinking about A, it seems unlikely that that's the best answer. Too many committees. Well, what is too many committees? And the number of committees, I mean, you obviously, the more people you have, the more bandwidth you have for your board to be on committees, to have different committees and multiple committees. But yeah, I think as far as a danger, I don't think having too many committees is necessarily a danger. It might actually divide the work up a little bit better and provide some focus there for the large board. What the challenge with a large board, and I think that the D really focuses in on it, or one of the challenges or one of the dangers of having a large board, is that it's more difficult to have consensus to make decisions. And so the executive committee will make all of the important decisions. So of the options that I'm given here, and I'm sure there are other dangers out there of having large boards, of the options, I'm going to pick D, because I'm just thinking that kind of like wrangling a decision amongst a larger cohort of people may be the best answer as far as a danger of having a large board. I don't know. What are we looking at in the chat? I don't have my chat board up. It's because I don't want to get distracted. And what's the consensus before we ask for Ryan to reveal the answer?
I think these are all from the last question.
Oh, nobody wants to talk about this one. Well, I'm going to go with D, that
Alright.
it's more likely with a large board that the executive committee will be making all the important decisions. D
It's
it
D.
is. Okay.
Do you
Too
think this
many,
is do
too
you think
many with the chiefs in the kitchen. I think that's the saying.
do you think this is one of those ones that you necessarily have to be on a board for to understand, or kind of the way you
Mm,
broke it down, you made it simple, there's just too many people to get
yeah,
necessarily a consensus?
I think that for preparing for this section or these questions, this area, it would behoove you to kind of understand in general, like, what is the board made up of? Executive committee, different committees like finance committee, nominating committee, things like that, that the boards are made up of the committee. What are generally the responsibilities of the board? Like, we got the question about, are they in the weeds with, deciding of who's getting hired for each position, or which physician, who's hiring the physicians. So I think that and I don't think it necessarily has to be very specific to healthcare. There may be some nuances with healthcare, but the duty of loyalty is another, general concepts, I think, as far as board organization and board leadership would be good to brush up on, or just familiarize yourself if you don't deal with it on maybe a regular basis through either volunteer activities, or you happen to be the CEO of an organization and you're dealing with the board all the time. These answers are probably rudimentary if you're in that position. Does that answer your question, Ryan?
Yeah, I think that definitely
Yeah.
covered it.
Common sense too also helps. Just slow but steady, talking yourself through the questions. Okay, let's go on to the next question. Is there another? I don't know. Can't remember how many questions we have in this section.
I think we have 10 like the other ones,
Oh,
so
okay.
only a
So
couple
3 more to
left.
go. We're doing great with time. Okay, let's go on to the next question. So, which of the following should be included in an organization's mission statement? Okay, so what you need to know here is what makes up a mission statement versus a vision statement, maybe versus your core values, which often are also kind of up in front with the vision, mission, and values of the organization. So should be included. Okay, the first option is ethics, mission statement, services, strategies, and facilities. When I think of mission statement, I think that's your day-to-day bread and butter. What is your organization doing? What is their main purpose in life, so to speak? And so while ethics are important to your mission and maybe the facilities that you have, in your actual statement, your mission statement, I'm not including those. Now, when it comes to strategies, you may have strategies to deliver your mission, but as far as your statement, typically mission and vision statements are pretty short and sweet. They're not lengthy, and strategies may change too. Your mission statement typically is core to your organization throughout the longevity of the organization, whereas strategies can definitely change depending on the environment and things like that, resources. So I'm going to go with services. Healthcare is known as a service industry, and so that's my best answer. Services are going to be included in our mission statement, at least broad brush services. What is it, Ryan?
It is services.
It is services.
We did
Any
have
other comments?
yeah, we did have in the chat, there was some people who thought it was A, some people who thought it was C, and a few people who thought it was B. So there was some mixed thoughts on it.
You know, maybe you can, and I think this is getting back to the best answer. Maybe you can say, mention your ethical calling, or, you know, you're going to provide these services by doing XYZ or through, which, you know, could be seen as including strategies, but at the end of the day, core to your mission statement is what you're actually doing and and so that's why I think B is the best answer for this question. Okay, 2 more questions. Here we go. Longer question. The process of validating a professional's eligibility for medical staff membership. So the professionals we're talking about here are clinicians, and privileges. So maybe privileges to a hospital to be granted on the basis of academic preparation. So we've got some privileging, very in all honesty, I think all the answers are involved in the process of validating someone's eligibility for membership, as well as their eligibility for privileges at level. So privileging, that wouldn't be the best answer. I think it's duplicative. You're like saying the answer that is in the question. Unlikely, in my opinion, for this specific question. Verification process, well, that's what it says. That's what it's trying to ask us the answer. So the process of validating is considered something. Is that the verification process? Again, it kind of falls into the same bucket as the answer or the option A. They seem to be included in the question. Sometimes that can be true, but in this case, I don't think either A or B are the best. And then C, credentialing. Well, the question seems to be for more or less the definition of the credentialing process. And credentialing process can include, eligibility for medical staff membership or privileges to a hospital. Credentialing sometimes also is, that word is used when health plans go through a credentialing process to become contracted or part of their, contracted network. So that is, C is definitely looking like the best answer, but I'm going to, I made my decision. Education authentication. Ugh, can't speak. Well, that kind of says right there the process of validating. When you're validating something, you're determining whether or not it's authentic. Is it true? So again, included but not overall. I think C is the best overall answer for what basically the question is the definition of credentialing. So for me, I don't know, in the chat, any other thoughts?
Mary, can I take a shot at it?
Yes, you can do that as well.
One of the things I really don't like on this question is that it's missing a verb, right? So I think it's asking the process of validating is with a choice, or we often, the process is commonly known as something like that. It's not giving us that, but I'm still interpreting it as they're looking for definition and they're looking for the name. So thinking about that, therefore, I can eliminate verification because that's not the process.
What is the process of
Yeah.
validating?
I can eliminate educational authentication because that's not the process of validating.
Well, it could
So
be included in part of
it's
that
included,
process. I think
it's included, but it isn't
Yeah.
is the that's
yes,
not
it's not the
that's what I keep
overall.
trying to put is that word is, and I may be wrong. Privileging to me is the end result, is giving the person privileges after you've validated their eligibility. So that's why
Right.
I would eliminate privileges. So I also got to C, but I got to it a little bit differently.
Sure. Exactly. Yes. The privileging is you're right, is the result. It says privileges to be granted on the basis of all those different things, which D follows under like that kind of list of things that they're looking at. So yeah, I think we're both saying it's C, but it's not the best word. It doesn't even have, it's more of like a statement, and you're supposed to like come up with, well, what are they really asking me to say here? So yeah, it's missing a question mark. Okay, let's go to the last question, and thank you, Richard, for chiming in and walking through it a little bit differently. The mission statement, okay, we're back to the mission statement of a healthcare organization should specify which 3 things. So we're looking at a list here, A, B, C, and D, that each include 3 things. And we need to walk through those and see if they are typically included in an organization's mission statement. So long range, let's start with A. Long range plans. Sometimes that's more akin to like your vision, what you envision your organization to do, not so much the mission. Accreditation bodies and profit margin. Well, your mission, again, as we talked about, are the core of your mission is your services, what you are providing, what you are doing. And I don't think A really gets to the core of a mission statement. So I'm not going to think right now, just reading those three options. And profit margin, can change. But maybe you want to state you want to have a certain profit margin for in your mission. I don't know. I guess an organization could do it, but I don't think it's one of the three basic things that it could, but should be included in your mission statement. So I don't think A is the best for right now. Let's look at B. Community to be served, scope of service, and financial constraints. Well, definitely community served is a big one in mission statements. Like if you're serving an underserved community or a specific community in an area, geographic area. So that's definitely looking good. Scope of service, well, what services are you providing? Typically are included in mission statements. You're not going to be, the mission kind of defines that you're not providing everything in the kitchen, to a community. You may be providing just primary care or specialty services or cutting edge services, things like that. Different types of services for your mission is definitely likely to be included and should be included in your mission statement. Financial constraints. This one, I'm not 100% sure that this should be one of the three things, but since the other two I definitely know should be, I'm going to kind of put this one to the side. Financial constraints, and the reason why I say that is they can change over time as well for an organization. So, but I'm going to hold that one as a maybe. Okay, the mission statement. Should it include joint ventures, employee satisfaction rating, and scope of service? Well, the one that sticks out for me here is employee satisfaction rating. Your mission is going to be core and typically shouldn't change like year to year, but your employee satisfaction rating could or possibly would. So that's the concern for C that I have, that I'm not really sold that that's the one that we should be picking. And let me look at the last one. The last one includes one from A, one from C, two from C. So it's got long range plans from A and joint ventures and employee satisfaction from C. Core, and that's how I'm reading this, that the mission statement at minimum should specify these three things. That's how I'm interpreting this question. So just by process of elimination, I think B has community to be served and scope of service as the best answers that I know from my experience are included on par with mission statements. So I'm going to go with B. Ryan, Richard, you have a difference looking at it in any different perspective?
No, I think that's the best way. And every time you have your four choices include a list, you really have to spend some time, but you can often just say there's one wrong thing as part of this list, therefore the entire list is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and when you're putting things in order, that's always one way to do it too. No, this is not the first one, therefore I can move on.
Right. Okay. Any other questions from the group? I think that was our last question, right?
That was, and I think
Okay, 3 minutes to spare.
3
Oh,
minutes to
goodness.
spare. Just one point I wanted to make about this that we've kind of talked about. Since this question kind of lists that scope of service as being something in the mission statement, if you weren't clear or understanding of that other question that asked about a mission statement, this one could kind of help you work through that question a little bit. If you put that one to the side and then came across this one and knew this is what it should be, you have that service listed in there, something that should be part of the mission statement. So it can kind of help you as you go back and review any questions you weren't clear on. You know, some of these questions kind of give you more information, like Richard said earlier, to kind of help you work through them.
Yes. And I think just in preparation for governance and organizational structure, you should remind yourself of, what are the definitions of these vision and mission statements, and what they accomplish, and having that basic or general understanding of why organizations have that. So what is a good resource other than the well-managed health? Stefan, it's a
I
good
think
question.
you can go on some organizations' websites, different, healthcare organizations, take a look, because they usually have a place where they list their mission, values, and vision. Kind of take a look
Their
to see how
board.
they're built out and what they list on there. That can kind of help you with looking at how they've constructed it.
Another thing too that I know that boards have annual reports, and just like looking at the structure, not so much the, under the detail, but looking at board reports, like annual reports, also can give you a good sense of, how the organization is structured, how the board is involved in that as well. The HR book in the BOG bundle does cover several of these items. Okay, thank you, Mel. There's another tip. Okay, I only have 1 minute for question and answer. I'm sorry, I pushed it to the limit today. Just trying to get through those as quickly as possible. Okay. Well, sounds like we brought session 2 to a close. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.